In the dark world of death row, where criminals await execution for their crimes, there is one detail that always arouses curiosity: the last meals. These choices can reveal a lot about the mind of those who make them, ranging from eccentric dishes to bizarre combinations. In this video, we will explore the 10 strangest meals ordered by criminals sentenced to death. Prepare yourself for a surprising journey, where appetite and psychology meet in unusual ways. Number 1. Victor Feguer. Victor Feguer is remembered not only for his crimes, but for one of the most enigmatic and symbolic requests for a final meal ever recorded. Feguer was sentenced to death in 1963 for the kidnapping and murder of a doctor in Iowa. During the trial, he never expressed any remorse, which made his final request all the more intriguing. Unlike many prisoners who opt for lavish meals, Feguer asked for only a single olive with a pit. This simple but symbolically charged request intrigued all those who witnessed his final hours. Feguer believed that after his death, the pit of the olive could be planted and eventually grow into an olive tree. For him, this tree represented the possibility of rebirth and a final connection with life. Even after death, the act of asking for something so small and meaningful reflects a complex state of mind. On the one hand, it is a refusal of material indulgences; on the other, it is an attempt to leave a symbolic legacy. It is not known whether the seed was actually planted after his execution, but Feguer's request continues to be remembered as a last attempt to transcend death. With this curious story, we realize that, as simple as the request may be, it can carry a deep emotional charge. Feguer's decision reveals a desire for immortality, in contrast to the crimes that landed him on death row. Now, moving on to another equally fascinating case, we come across John Wayne Gacy, whose last meal reflects an entirely different, but equally revealing side of the human mind. Number 2. John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy, known as the Killer Clown, left a terrible mark on American history. Convicted of murdering 33 young women, he shocked the world not only with the number of his victims, but also with the brutality of his crimes. Gacy lived a double life, acting as a model citizen while secretly committing horrific murders. His notoriety meant that his last meal was, in some ways, an extension of this disturbing character. When it came time to make his final order, Gacy chose a hearty and, oddly enough, nostalgic meal: a bucket of KFC fried chicken, French fries, fried shrimp, and fresh strawberries. Before his arrest, Gacy had managed 3 KFC franchises, and this meal seemed like an attempt to reconnect with an earlier period in his life, when his everyman facade was still intact. The symbolism of this meal is not lost on him. By choosing a meal so closely linked to his normal past, Gacy appears to be seeking a connection to the life he led before his crimes were discovered. At the same time, the lavishness of his order suggests a self-indulgence to the end, typical of someone who lived a life of excess and remorseless transgression. Unlike Feguer, whose final order reflected introspection and hope, Gacy's can be seen as an attempt to preserve the semblance of normalcy that he had carefully constructed. This rich and familiar meal, however, could not erase the dark legacy he left behind. Number 3. Timothy McVeigh. Timothy McVeigh, responsible for one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in American history, met an equally devastating end. In 1995, he detonated a truck bomb outside a federal building in Oklahoma City, killing 168 people and injuring hundreds more. His attack was a premeditated act of retaliation against the federal government, making him one of the most hated criminals in the country. Surprisingly, in contrast to his destructive act, McVeigh made a remarkably simple final request: 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. McVeigh's choice may seem trivial at first glance, but perhaps it reveals something deeper. Ice cream, often associated with childhood and comfort, seems an unexpected request from someone who committed such a brutal act. Mint chocolate chip is a popular choice, but its simplicity highlights the paradox between the nature of his crimes and what he craved in his final moments. It's possible that McVeigh wanted, consciously or not, to evoke a sense of normalcy or seek solace in a choice that harkened back to a more innocent time. The irony of a notorious terrorist asking for something as common as ice cream is hard to ignore. Like his refusal to express regret until the end, his request for ice cream may have been an act of quiet defiance. Number 4. Lawrence Brewer. Lawrence Brewer, executed for his role in the racially motivated murder of James Byrd Jr., made one of the most extravagant last meal requests in history. His participation in Byrd's brutal murder, dragged for miles behind a pickup truck, shocked America and the world. The sheer brutality of the crime made Brewer's sentencing an act of harsh justice. When it came time to place his last meal order, Brewer chose what appeared to be a feast for several people: 2 chicken fried steaks with gravy, a pound of bacon, 3 fajitas, a large steak pizza, 3 beers, a meatloaf, ice cream, and a large glass of sweet tea. The size and variety of the order were so exaggerated that it seemed like an act of defiance, as if Brewer were mocking the gravity of his situation. However, what made this request even more remarkable was the fact that when the meal arrived, Brewer refused to eat any of it. This wasteful and disrespectful gesture was not only shocking, but it also led to changes in Texas's last meal policies. The state has since abolished the practice of allowing personalized orders for death row inmates, serving only regular meals. Brewer's case highlights the symbolic power of last meals. While many prisoners use this moment to seek comfort or make a personal statement, Brewer used his request to make a final act of defiance, with lasting consequences for the prison system. Number 5. Ricky Ray Rector. Ricky Ray Rector is remembered not only for his crimes, but for the disturbing mental state he was in at the time of his execution. Convicted of murdering a police officer in Arkansas, Rector suffered a self-inflicted head injury during his arrest that caused significant brain damage. As a result, many have questioned whether he was fully aware of what was happening during his execution. His request for a final meal reflected this mental condition. He chose a traditional Southern meal: steak, French fries, cherry Kool-Aid, and pecan pie. However, what has garnered the most attention is the fact that after finishing his meal, Rector set the pecan pie aside, saying that he would save it for later. This comment led many to believe that Rector did not fully understand that he was about to be executed. Rector's simple request and attitude toward his final meal reflect the tragedy of his mental state. Unlike other prisoners, who make requests as a conscious act of farewell, Rector seemed unable to fully comprehend his situation. His gesture of keeping the pie resonates as a reminder that, for some prisoners, execution is fraught with emotional and psychological complexity that goes beyond the simple act of justice. Number 6. Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy needs no introduction. Known as one of the most notorious serial killers in history, he was convicted of the murders of more than 30 women, although many believe the true number of his victims is much higher. Intelligent, charismatic, and manipulative, Bundy used his charm to lure and murder his victims, keeping the world in shock as his crimes were revealed. When it was his turn to choose a final meal, Bundy surprisingly refused to make any special requests. Instead, he was served the standard prison meal of steak, scrambled eggs, hash browns, buttered toast, and coffee. This refusal may have been Bundy's last attempt at control. By not participating in a final tradition, he was, in a sense, rejecting the system that had convicted him. The simplicity of the request may have been intentional, reflecting Bundy's ruthless nature right up until the very end. By not expressing any wishes or desires, Bundy may have attempted to convey a sense of indifference toward his own execution, remaining true to his image of disinterest in the feelings and consequences of his actions. Number 7. Ronnie Lee Gardner. Ronnie Lee Gardner, convicted of murder during a 1985 courthouse escape attempt, is known for his request for a final meal, both for its abundance and for its inclusion of a rather peculiar detail. His life on death row was marked by an intense interest in literature and pop culture, something that was evident in his final wishes. For his final meal, Gardner requested a feast consisting of lobster tail, steak, apple pie, and vanilla ice cream. This would be an impressive request on its own, but the prisoner made an unusual additional request. He wanted to watch the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy while enjoying his meal. This desire to prolong his final moments, through an experience as immersive as watching an epic film series, suggests that Gardner was trying to escape his impending reality. Unlike prisoners who focus on the food itself, Gardner used the moment to create a kind of final entertainment. This may indicate his need to mentally escape the execution, or possibly an attempt to maintain a semblance of normalcy in his final moments. The lavish meal, combined with his request to spend hours immersed in fantasy, shows how Gardner treated his final moments as a more extended ritual, almost as if he wanted to prolong the inevitable. By choosing to binge-watch a movie, he created a way to mentally postpone the moment of his death. Number 8. Angel Nieves Diaz. Angel Nieves Diaz, executed in 2006 for the murder of a bar manager during a robbery in Florida, took a completely different approach to his last meal. Diaz, who has always maintained his innocence, made a point of refusing any special meal before his execution. Rather than indulge in the custom of a last meal, Diaz refused the privilege, receiving only the prison staple food that he refused to touch. His decision not to accept a final meal was interpreted by many as an act of protest against the system that condemned him. For Diaz, accepting a final meal could be seen as a kind of resignation to a fate that he believed was unjust. The act of refusing the meal also serves to highlight the emotional complexity that surrounds executions. While some prisoners seek solace or nostalgia in their final food choices, Diaz opted for complete denial. This gesture of protest was a way of resisting to the end, maintaining a stance of defiance against what he considered a wrongful execution. Number 9. Steven Anderson. Steven Anderson, sentenced to death for a series of crimes that included murder and prison escape, made a final request that reflected a curious combination of tastes and preferences that seemed unrelated to one another. In 2002, before his execution, Anderson chose a meal that seemed, at first glance, unusual: cottage cheese, peach cobbler, chocolate ice cream, French toast, and radishes. This eccentric choice seems to reflect Anderson's complex mind. The mix of sweet and savory flavors, with items ranging from desserts to bitter vegetables like radishes, makes it difficult to trace a clear logic behind the request. However, this combination may suggest that Anderson was less concerned with creating a cohesive meal and more interested in enjoying foods that he simply liked, regardless of how they fit together. This type of request reveals a fragmented mind, perhaps seeking comfort in small, individual food pleasures rather than a more symbolic meal. It is possible that Anderson, in his final moments, was not thinking about conveying a specific message with his meal, but simply about satisfying a personal desire that did not fit into the usual conventions. Number 10. Velma Barfield. Velma Barfield was the first woman to be executed in the United States after the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. Convicted of murdering her boyfriend and accused of poisoning several others, Barfield committed crimes that shocked the public, especially given her image as an elderly, seemingly harmless woman. When it came time for her final meal, Barfield made a request that, compared to others, might seem modest and even ordinary. She asked for Cheetos and a Coke. In opting for these simple and popular items, Barfield may have been seeking something that would bring her comfort. Cheetos and soda are products associated with everyday life, and her request may have been an attempt to cling to normalcy. In her final moments of this request, devoid of any luxury or extravagance, reflects a desire for simplicity, perhaps an echo of who Barfield wanted to be remembered as, despite the crimes she committed. Like Victor Fager, who requested an olive, Barfield seems to have chosen a meal that speaks more to comfort than indulgence,